So the story and situation is that many of the top, not even top 5 now, but top 20 banks are now on the verge of collapsing or have already collapsed or is interestingly now set to be bailed out and saved because of everything that's been going on. So in today's video, what I really want to talk about is to make a little bit of a follow-up video, because we did make another video that talks about the foundation of what's been going on with the banking collapse. We talked a lot about Silicon Valley Bank, but the big new update is that there are a lot of other banks that have now officially popped out to announce that they're going through some kind of difficulty right now, such as like Credit Suisse Bank, First Republic Bank, Deutsche Bank. We're definitely going to talk a little bit about Deutsche Bank today. And so just many other banks that have just basically popped up to talk about how they might now start or have already started to announce that they're currently struggling right now. And a lot of other banks that are expected to potentially now follow, because the banking system is a little bit like a domino, whereas one falls, many of them starts to follow along, and it just goes one by one by one by one. Of course, there are now many that are also expected to be bailed out, and that is something that we're going to talk about. So in today's video, if you are someone that basically is really interested in just hearing what's going on with the banking situation, if you want to know about what's the story with that, should we be protecting our money, how should we be protecting our money, and what this basically means for us, then welcome, because you are in the right video. So with that being said, let's just get this video started. But as always, real fast, if you guys enjoy videos like this, remember to smash the like button, consider commenting, feel free to comment any questions, thoughts, and consider subscribing and hitting the bell for similar videos like this. So with that being said, now let's get this video rolling and started. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about the story and situation of what's going on with Deutsche Bank. And the reasoning why is because they are the bank that's expected next to fall because of everything that's been happening right now. Now, there are a lot of big differences, which is why I consider this as relatively pretty new information, between what happened with Deutsche, or what's going to suspected to be happening with Deutsche Bank, and then also with Silicon Valley Bank, which we already made a video talking about. Highly recommend checking that at the very, very end screen. It's going to be literally called Danger or something along that lines, Silicon Valley Bank collapse or something like that, because there are a lot of differences between what happened in that video and what's going to be happening soon with Deutsche Bank. The biggest story is that Deutsche Bank is a bank that runs and operates with about $1.5 trillion worth of assets. Their stock recently declined by about 20 to 30% over the last month or two, so it's definitely been massively impacted. But the biggest difference, and one of the biggest differences between Deutsche Bank and what happened with Silicon Valley Bank, is that Silicon Valley Bank was a bank that was really targeted at really housing the money for a lot of big startups and investors. So basically, most people that have a bank with Silicon Valley Bank have about millions and millions of dollars, because it's being used to fund or to store money for a lot of businesses and new companies. Now, Deutsche Bank, on the other hand, is a little bit more of a unique bank, because not only is the bank a lot larger in size, which means that it's going to be a lot harder to fail, because again, there's a saying, too big to fail. You guys probably already know about that saying, but also because Deutsche Bank's clients actually have a lot more variety to it. It's not just exclusively dedicated to startup companies. Deutsche Bank serves things such as like the people. I believe that they're German based, so they serve things such as like the people, they serve international countries, they serve businesses, they serve companies, and they also serve just individuals just like us, like you and I, and individuals that just need a place to store money. So that is one of the biggest differences between what we are going through with Deutsche Bank and what's going on with Silicon Valley Bank, and also of course with the other banks as well. But I'm just using these because they're the two more distinct banks that are expected, or again have already failed, or expected to be bailed out relatively soon. Now, if that all becomes the case, then the real question now becomes, what is the problem, or what is exactly going on? And this is the part that becomes really interesting. So Deutsche Bank, one of the biggest differences between Deutsche Bank and Silicon Valley Bank is that a lot of the stuff that happened with Silicon Valley Bank was really because of mismanagement with money, because they ran into a lot of difficulties in situation, such as, for example, with the FDIC kind of situation where they covered about $250,000 worth of assets, but most people in Silicon, or that have money in Silicon Valley Bank, have significantly more than $250,000 in assets. With Deutsche Bank, one of the biggest differences is is that Deutsche Bank actually did run into a lot of scandals over the last couple of years, or just controversy and situations that popped up. For example, there were a lot of accounts that, because they do a lot of stuff with international trade and money, that maybe they were suspected of potentially attempting something related to money laundering. So that was one of the biggest differences. But the big idea is that they have their own particular set of problems, but the similarity is that they're both banks that are expected to go, or have already are on the path of going down under at this time. So what's going on right now, and this is the part where how this relates to you and I, is that because many of these banks are in danger of collapsing and going down under, it means that it's starting to evoke a lot of fear in a lot of the common individuals as well, such as you and I. I think the good news is that if you bank with a typical American large giant top 5 bank, so if you bank with something along the lines of like Chase, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase, we mentioned that, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, anything in that world, Capital One, you should be relatively safe with your money. However, if you bank with one of the smaller banks, that's the part that becomes a massive concern. And by smaller, we mean basically just any bank that's not in the top 5 or the top 10 bank especially. A lot of those banks, even if they're actually still pretty big banks in general, as long as they're not part of the top 5 or top 10 tier banks, the big idea is that they're also now receiving a lot of different concerns where many people are trying to take the money and withdraw it fast in order to kind of put their money elsewhere where they feel that it's going to be a lot safer. This is where the collapse and crisis really comes in, is because if every single person is rushing to, in this situation, Deutsche Bank, or just, it's not just Deutsche, but basically any other banks, Credit Suisse, First Republic Bank, any of the non-big, giant, but non-top 5/10 banks, then the issue is that if everyone is withdrawing money from their accounts really, really quickly, then it means that a lot of these banks don't have physically enough money to basically be able to help and execute all of these different transactions. That becomes one of the massive issues and situation that's going on. But in terms of what is the solution about what everyone is doing, is that once they're trying to withdraw their money, what they're going to do is that they're going to be taking their money and moving it now to other much larger and safer banks to do it. You might be wondering, well, why don't people actually just, did this from the start? And the big idea is that because there are still a lot of benefits to banking with smaller banks. Typically, they say that in a lot of smaller banks, you might be able to receive, again, this depends on the smaller bank because there are so many banks out there. But typically with a lot of smaller banks, you might be able to receive better interest rates. You might get a little bit more of a personal touch to your banking situation. And sometimes it's just bias, because if you might be from a town where maybe that particular, even though it's a small bank around the country, in your particular town, depending on your location, there might be a particular bank that just dominates that particular region. And that is really the big idea to why there are some people that might be banking there but are now looking to take their money out and try to transfer it into these other larger, more legendary, I say legendary, but what I really mean is just banks that have been around for years and years and that are truly, truly massively big in size, that serve basically around the world. Those are the banks that I think a lot of people are trying to take their money and move it into as well. There are also a lot of people that are thinking about taking their money and moving it into other assets as well. So not necessarily putting in let's just say a savings account within a bank, but possibly even moving it into other kinds of assets such as like gold and silver. That is actually especially popular because right now at this time, we are going through inflation, we are going through things with the stock market, and interest rates are very high. So that is one thing that is relatively nice for, in terms of receiving money from our savings account. But it's just ways to basically diversify the situation and where we put our money to make sure and help to, deal with everything that's happening right now. Now, in terms of even more about what this means for us is that one of the big things is that there are going to be banks that will be bailed out during this situation. I think the big idea, and the reason I say I think, is because they're still planning what they're going to do. So some of it is a prediction at this time period. But the big idea is that there are a lot of top banks that is believed by the government to be so big in size, such as like JP Morgan, Capital One, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. And again, because we've mentioned these banks, and these are also the most popular banks that most people that are watching this video, including me, probably bank with anyway, that are truly so big that if there was going to be some kind of collapse, it would wreak massive destruction to our banking system, that in this situation, it would cause the government to do almost anything they can in their power to bail out these banks. So why this means, or what this means for us is that if we are someone that currently banks with one of these giant large banks that I just mentioned, or anything in that caliber, we should be relatively safe. And I think that is the really great news. Now, if you don't bank with any of these particular banks, and if you bank with something that is at least still FDIC insured up to $250,000, then the great news is that you should probably also be safe because of everything that's happening. However, if you are someone that banks with a smaller bank, sadly, because of the situation, what this means is that there might be a lot of smaller banks that they do let go down under, and that it might be time to consider taking the money that you have in these smaller banks and moving it into these larger companies as well. You might have a reasoning why you want to bank with these smaller banks like the ones we just mentioned, but at this time, I think for the sake of safety and security, it might be time to reconsider. But I think, of course, what we do with our money, that's all up to individual decisions. But I think that this is hopefully a way to paint light about what other people are currently doing around the world right now, because this really is a global situation. But beyond that that's pretty much what I really just wanted to cover in today's video. So if you guys made it to the end, thank you guys so much for watching all the way through. Maybe leave a comment or anything along that lines of, questions, thoughts about anything. Consider smashing the like button, subscribing, and hitting the bell for similar videos as we get more information. And with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, stay safe, stay well, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.